Israel launches ground offensive on Gaza City. Hamas warns Gaza offensive endangers civilians and Israeli captives. And US President Trump reiterates Israel will not strike Qatar again. Heavy smoke rose over Gaza as reports said Israeli forces launched a ground offensive to seize Gaza City. Axios, citing Israeli officials, reported the occupation military pushed in after weeks of intensive strikes. Israeli forces have been operating on the outskirts for weeks, edging towards the city center, where around 1 million Palestinians were sheltering last month. Palestinians in Gaza City say children were pulled from the rubble after Israel unleashed a massive overnight bombing campaign. Residents harrowing scenes as they searched through debris, saying children were recovered in pieces. The strikes came as Israeli troops advanced into the center of Gaza's largest urban hub. The military official confirmed the ground offensive, calling it a next stage of Israel's push to capture Gaza City, where hundreds of thousands of civilians remain trapped under heavy bombardment. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says the army will not retreat until Hamas is defeated and the captives have returned. Katz said the military is striking Hamas infrastructure with an iron fist to secure conditions for the captives' release. He vowed Israel will push on until its mission in Gaza is complete. On the other hand, Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid says that the Gaza operation lacks political goals and endangers captives and soldiers. Lapid warned no country can fight a war for a year without clear objectives. He further said that the offensive risks both Israeli captives and troops on the ground. Hamas has warned that Israel's ground offensive in Gaza City endangers Palestinian civilians and the lives of Israeli soldiers held captive. In a statement on Telegram, Hamas accused Israel of carrying out a systemic campaign of destruction in Gaza City. The group said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bears full responsibility for the captives' safety and criticized President Donald Trump for what he called a double standard in supporting Israel despite the high civilian death toll. Hamas said Washington's backing makes the U.S. directly responsible for the escalations. Families of Israeli captives have protested in Jerusalem, urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire deal to bring them home. The demonstrations came as Axios reported Israel launched a ground offensive to seize Gaza City, the enclave's largest urban center. The move follows weeks of heavy bombardment and a siege that has left Gaza in humanitarian crisis, with widespread destruction, mass displacement, and severe shortages of food and water. Netanyahu has ordered the army to capture Gaza City, describing it as a Hamas stronghold. Israel's army radio says more than 350,000 Palestinians have fled Gaza City to the south. The occupation military expects the exodus to accelerate as Israeli forces advance into Gaza City. Israeli media report the Security Cabinet estimates the ground operation will end by year's end. A Palestinian foreign ministry says Israel's assault on Gaza City is putting hundreds of thousands of civilians at risk. The ministry accused Israel of deliberately targeting civilians and making Gaza unlivable. It urged urgent international action to stop what it called a major crime. Germany and Sweden have criticized Israel's advance on Gaza City, warning it breaches international law and worsens the humanitarian crisis. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul said incidents outlined in the recent UN report were very worrying and called Israel's offensive the wrong approach, adding Berlin has already restricted arms deliveries. He also ruled that recognizing a Palestinian state now, but reaffirmed support for a two-state solution. Swedish Foreign Minister Maria Malmar Stangard said any change of territory by force would violate international law and urged pressure on both Israel and Hamas to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. A top UN official has warned of a preventable famine in Gaza and urged Israel to allow unimpeded aid delivery. UN Chief Tom Fletcher told the Security Council that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are already at risk, particularly in Gaza City, where Israel has launched a new offensive. He said aid deliveries during a previous ceasefire showed famine can be stopped if access is granted. Israel says it is easing restrictions, but international agencies insist far more is needed. Local health officials say at least 16 Palestinians were killed in Israeli strikes on homes and the tent sheltering displaced families.
We need a ceasefire now. And all of this, of course, is against a backdrop where the rules of war are being corroded day by day. We've heard Israeli ministers talking openly about flattening Gaza and forcing people out permanently, bombing food aid, and so on. And I've said consistently, I don't think that we have to choose between condemning the starving.
The United Nations says Israeli authorities blocked multiple aid missions to Gaza City despite initial approvals. UN spokesperson Olga Cherveko said convoys were stopped at Wadi Gaza Bridge on Sunday, preventing supplies from reaching civilians trapped in the north. She stressed the need for unimpeded, rapid and safe access to protect those unable or unwilling to flee. Israel's ground offensive to capture Gaza City has created a deepening humanitarian crisis with widespread destruction, mass displacement and severe shortages of food and water. A United Nations Commission has concluded that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, holding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other top officials responsible. The Commission's 72-page report cites mass killings and aid blockages, forced displacement, and even the destruction of a fertility clinic as evidence. Navi Pillai, head of the inquiry and a former ICC judge, said Israeli leaders had shown genocidal intent, making the state accountable. The Gaza war has since killed more than 64,000 people, with aid monitors warning parts of the enclave are already in famine.
Into Palestine yet, we will, because this is a permanent commission. And we named the 3 individuals that we felt were responsible. And we said, and the one is the Prime Minister, the other the President, and the third is the former Minister of Defense. And we said that since they acted as agents of the state, then the state...
For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the International Relations Specialist, Mohammed Osman. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Qnews.
Thank you for having me, Rehan.
It's always a pleasure. Let's start off by asking, what are the strategic and humanitarian implications of the Israeli full-scale, ground offensive, if that's what they're calling it, even though it's an invasion and a seizure of Gaza City?
Well, it seems, Rehan, that the Netanyahu government now is taking the crisis in Gaza to a point of no return, meaning that the implications of what is to come will be detrimental to the stability and the security of the region at large, and not only the occupied Palestinian territories. And the implications will be very long-lasting and will certainly go beyond the borders of historical Palestine if Israel sees through its entire plans to destroy Gaza City. And of course, for further context, Gaza City, the offensive on Gaza City actually started a few months ago, and Israel already occupies about 45% of the city, especially the southern suburbs and outskirts and some parts of the eastern parts of the city, and they were demolishing these parts. However, now they are entering the downtown area, the main town, the center of the city itself. And of course, the city is the largest urban center in the Gaza Strip, and it is also one of the few remaining relatively standing urban spaces in the Gaza Strip, even though it has been thoroughly devastated by the war over the past roughly 2 years. It was subjected to intensive airstrikes. The Israeli army did carry out incursions into the city, but now they seek to replicate the model they established in Beit Hanun, in Beit Lahia, in Rafah, in huge parts of Khan Yunis, in Gaza City, meaning they wish to obliterate and flatten the city entirely and displace 1 million Palestinians out of the city to central and southern Gaza.
Which kind of brings on the next point here, sir. I mean, the Israeli army is always claiming things like when they're bombing the hospitals or, bringing down residential towers. The claim is always it's operations essential, basically, to defeat Hamas and secure the release of the captives. Now, this tariff argument, do you believe it is something that the world may agree with, or is it actually endangering the captives' lives and also endangering, obviously, the civilians living in Gaza, as well as making it unlivable?
Of course, fascist claims, as usual, lies, absolute Israeli lies. The Israelis now, I think that the Israeli government does not hold the safety of the hostages as a priority anymore. And if there are some signs of some sense of coordination between the Israelis and the Americans now on how to justify the death of the remaining detainees and hostages in the Gaza Strip. When President Trump goes on social media and claims that Hamas is now going to use the detainees as human shields and that he is warning them of the consequences, meaning he is laying the responsibility on them now and exonerating Israel, which is escalating the war by invading Gaza City and attempting to destroy it, which endangers naturally the remaining detainees in the captivity of Hamas and the other resistance factions. So now it seems that they are laying the groundworks for that. And of course, all of the Israeli justifications for their naked aggression and their new act of ethnic cleansing and forced displacement and mass killings. Of course, these combined, do you know what do they constitute, Reham? They constitute genocide.
Yeah, the report just came out today about that.
Yes, exactly. which what the UN Commission has finally decided after very intensive investigations for the past couple of years. So as you can see, the Israelis right now, they are using false pretexts and false claims to destroy Gaza City with the aim of moving the entirety of the population of Gaza to the southern area of Al-Mawasi in the Gaza Strip, 5 kilometers away from the border with Egypt. And this is very dangerous, by the way. So there are already about 1 million plus 1.4 million Palestinians now in southern Gaza. And now they are attempting to move the remaining 600,000 Palestinians in northern Gaza. They were a million, about 400,000 fled due to the Israeli bombardment. Now they seek to move the rest of them to the south. This means that they are downsizing the Gaza Strip. And of course, if we link this to previous reports, if you remember, Rehan, about the possibility of annexing parts of the Gaza Strip, especially northern Gaza, Ben Gvir, the Minister of National Security, promised during a conference with fellow security officers, the officers of his ministry, telling them, I promise you, I will build you a compound, a sea view compound in the place that used to be called Gaza City as a reward for your services. This shows you the true intentions behind very prominent factions in this Israeli government, which is land acquisition, annexation of parts of the Gaza Strip, especially the north, and of course, the displacement of the Palestinians.
Well, now you brought up the idea of having the Palestinians living in the north and middle areas of Gaza City to move southwards. Now, the forcible displacement, what does it actually mean for the broader humanitarian crisis within Gaza and shelter for these people?
It will only deepen the crisis. You saw those horrendous videos of the destruction of the Great Towers in Gaza, how they took out these towers, one tower after another. Each and every one of these mega towers housed thousands of civilian refugees and displaced persons, not only residents, by the way, because these huge buildings were used as sanctuaries. Now, by taking them out and moving those hundreds of thousands of people, of tens of thousands of families out of the Gaza City into an already overcrowded area in central Gaza that is in al-Nusayrat and Deir al-Balah, and to an even more overcrowded area in southern Gaza, and that is al-Mawasi area, it will only deepen the humanitarian crisis and turn it into a full-scale catastrophe of gargantuan proportions, Rehan. We will see more starvation, more death, more mass killings. That today, just with the beginning of the main phase of the ground operation in Gaza City, about 100 civilians have died already, and of course that is probably an underestimate. The numbers might be much higher. So the human suffering will increase. Israel is still stifling the entry of humanitarian aid, whether from its own border crossings with the Gaza Strip or from its border, the Gaza-Egypt border, the Karam-Abu Salim border crossing, as because you well know the Rafah border crossing is closed from the Israeli side or from the Palestinian side due to the Israeli occupation of the Rafah area. So as you can see, they are creating this humanitarian crisis. It's a man-made humanitarian crisis designed to make life impossible for the people of Gaza, so that eventually Gaza would be depopulated, Rehan. This is the ultimate aim of the Israelis.
Well, now, since we're talking about the ultimate aim here, now the Israelis have said that their timeline for ending the Gaza City operation is by year's end. Is this something that they're just saying to ease pressure off of them, or are they planning long-term, occupation of Gaza City? And what are the risks of a possible prolonged campaign here?
They are already hinting that this will be a very long campaign that will even go beyond Gaza City. They said that it will take us a few weeks to clear Gaza City, occupy it, and eventually demolish it, of course. And then the Israeli Chief of Staff, General Eyal Zamir, said something that is very interesting and, of course, indicates of the dangers that are to come. He said, word for word, that the occupation of Gaza City and its depopulation, of course, will not be sufficient to destroy Hamas and defeat it definitively. So we will need to move our operations afterwards to central Gaza, to Deir al-Balah, and to al-Nusayrat, meaning that the two last remaining urban spaces, those two big refugee camps or towns, will be destroyed as well in another ground operation after Gaza, so that everyone will be in the south by the end of this war. And I think the estimates that they will continue this war for from 6 months to even another year, unfortunately. And why are they capable of undertaking such a sinister mission, Rehan? It's because the US supports them unconditionally and tells them, yes, attaboy, go do whatever you want, go kill more civilians, go occupy Gaza, go depopulate cities and destroy cities live on air, go commit genocide, go expand into the borders, into the countries that are bordering you, be aggressive, be a menace, be a threat to everyone. This is the message the US is conveying to Israel. and the message the U.S. is conveying to the world. So much for U.S. leadership.
Okay, thank you so much for that. From Cairo, that was the international relations specialist, Hamad Osman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has rejected a UN inquiry report accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza, calling it a libelous rant. Ambassador Daniel Meron dismissed the Commission of Inquiry's findings as fake and scandalous, saying they relied on misleading statistics and weak data. The Commission concluded Israel committed genocide and that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials had incited such acts. Israel declined to cooperate, accusing the Commission of political bias.
Have been condemned worldwide. Released today another fake report about Gaza.
The UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian rights says Israel is making Gaza City unlivable and endangering the lives of Israeli captives. Francesca Albanese told reporters in Geneva that Israel is destroying Gaza with what she called unconventional weapons, aiming to forcibly evacuate 800,000 Palestinians. She accused Israel of genocide and said the international community is complicit. Israel insists its offensive targets Hamas and urges civilians to move south, but the UN says this amounts to a forcible displacement with dire humanitarian conditions in so-called safe zones.
The question is why? Why? Because this is the last piece of Gaza.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel must boost its arms industry to counter what he calls a Western diplomatic siege. Speaking at the opening of the largest ever U.S. legislative delegation to Israel, Netanyahu accused Qatar, China and others of funding a media campaign against Israel in the West, including the United States. He said the alleged diplomatic siege will push Israel to strengthen its independence in weapons production while vowing to continue efforts to lift the restrictions.
Thank you. החלק השני הוא יותר ממוקד, הוא ממוקד במדינות מערב אירופה.
Protests erupted in Tel Aviv as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in court to testify in his corruption trial. Demonstrators dressed in orange and wearing Netanyahu masks gathered outside the courthouse, chanting and holding signs. Some accused him of clinging to power while the Gaza war rages. Netanyahu is facing multiple corruption charges, which he denies in a case separate from the ongoing conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Doha for talks with Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Rubio's visit comes ahead of a regional summit he will join with other leaders. Rubio called for Qatar to continue its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire in the Gaza war, saying there was a very short window of time in which a deal could happen. U.S. President Donald Trump has reiterated that Israel will not carry out another strike on Qatar. Speaking at the Oval Office, Trump repeated his earlier assurance that Israeli attacks on Qatari territory will not be repeated. His comments follow heightened regional tensions after last week's strike, which drew sharp condemnation on Arab and Islamic states and prompted calls for international guarantees of Qatar's security.
You're allowed to go. The Emir said, you can say it any way you want, but I've always thought of it as Qatar. I think it's a beautiful sound.
The UN has warned of intensifying hostilities between Israel and Yemen's Houthis amid the Gaza war, citing escalating drone and missile attacks. UN envoy Hans Grunberg told the Security Council the Houthis have launched numerous strikes on Israel, injuring civilians and disrupting an airport, while Israeli strikes in Sana'a killed civilians and senior Houthi officials. Britain condemned Houthi attacks but urged Israel to uphold humanitarian law. UN aid chief Tom Fletcher said more than 300 people have been killed in recent strikes and demanded the release of 44 UN staff detained by Houthis, calling their arrest intolerable.
Numerous civilians.
The strikes on the 28th of August also killed senior Ansar officials, some of whom were interlocutors of my office.
In a breaking development, tensions are escalating in Yemen as Houthi media claims an Israeli airstrike had targeted the port of Al-Hudaydah. According to Houthi sources, a series of violent explosions rocked the port area late last night, with local reports suggesting significant structural damage. The port, which serves as a key lifeline for humanitarian aid and commercial goods into northern Yemen, is under the control of Houthi forces. Israeli military radio later confirmed that Air Force jets had carried out strikes on what it described as military infrastructure used by the Houthis in Al-Hudaydah. The Israeli military has not released specific details of the targets, but military analysts suggest the strikes may be part of a broader campaign to weaken Houthi capabilities following months of cross-border hostilities. And now we explore the latest developments in the Russian-Ukraine war. Finland's president and Latvia's president have condemned Russian drone incursions into NATO airspace, calling them unacceptable and dangerous. Speaking at a joint press conference in Riga, Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs said more than 19 drones flying into Poland last week could not be accidental, warning it showed either intent, incompetence, or both. He welcomed NATO's decision to boost eastern air defenses under Eastern Sentry, but stressed the need for better anti-drone systems. Finnish President Alexander Stubb called Russia's actions as an escalation of its war in Ukraine and said European security remains a top priority for the United States and NATO.
To increase air defense capabilities of the eastern flank is appropriate.
Poland says it has neutralized a drone flying over sensitive government sites in Warsaw amid heightened regional tensions. Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the drone was detected over Parkowa Street and Bewalder Palace, with 2 Belarusian citizens detained. The incident follows Poland's downing of Russian drones last week in the first such NATO action since the Ukraine war began. Days later, Romania scrambled jets after a Russian drone breached its airspace, underscoring growing regional security risks. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians remain missing since Russia's full-scale invasion as families search desperately for answers. Authorities say at least 70,000 soldiers and civilians are unaccounted for, with many feared dead or held in Russian captivity. In recent months, more than 7,000 unidentified bodies have been returned to Ukraine, many in fragments requiring DNA testing for identification. Forensic labs in Kiev are working under immense stress, with the process taking months. The influx of remains is a stark reminder of the war's toll, as the independent estimate suggests nearly 1 million Russian casualties and 400,000 Ukrainian dead or wounded. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Israel launches a ground offensive on Gaza City. Hamas warns Gaza offensive endangers civilians and Israeli captives. And U.S. President Trump reiterates Israel will not strike Qatar again. This brings us to the end of our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates.